If you have some questions, I would ask that you would wait until I get through that, or we'd go individually as we did last week or 2 weeks ago, and I'll answer those questions at the end. So as far as the scope of the escalator project and its replacement process, we'll be reinstalling 4 escalators at the Van Ness station, starting in with the entrance escalator. The replacement itself will take approximately about 3 years, hopefully less. Metro contractor will be Kone. They will be installing the new escalators one at a time. That's the challenge. The 2 upper level mass escalators on the east entrance, along with the 2 station elevators, will remain in service due the whole duration of the project. We'll be investigating the conditions of the stairs on the west entrance. That is the critical piece of maintaining that entrance open while we work to replace the escalators. Thanks, man. Why 3 years? Again, each of the escalators in preparation for the demolition and the construction portion of it, and installation and testing. Replacement of these escalators, a little bit more complicated than the average because we're working under a canopy. We're not going right in, and as you know, we're going through a tunnel, existing operating conditions within the subway itself. Replacement requires a little bit more crane activity than normal. We'll also be holding the structural members of those escalators to investigate, the integrity of the wellway and other things as we get to that point. Truss movement and steel erection and disassembly can only be performed during the late midnight hours. So from 12 to 5 a.m. is when we have the opportunity to do our work. That, again, lies a challenge. So really, we only work in perhaps 4 hours a night. So by the time we get set up, after the last train leaves, the contractor and our employees are in there for about 3.5 hours, really getting the work done. So prior to an hour before opening, we're really starting to, clean back up and have the system available for operation for the 5:30 opening. Next. How this will affect you all. Again, the customers will need to enter and exit the station on the east side of Connecticut Avenue. The long escalators will remain in service during the stint of the project, 1 up, 1 down. So 2 of the 3 escalators from the intermediate to mezz level will be in service. The entrance elevator, again, on the west side of Connecticut Avenue will remain open as well. This next key bullet, again, is where we are. Once we remove the escalator and start the project, the removal of the street escalator, we can start the assessment of the structural integrity for the west entrance stairs to explore the feasibility of opening it periodically. And I think that's where we are right now. We were very confident that we could be able to do that once we explored and investigated the integrity of the stairs. We've also worked closely and collaboratively with DDOT to minimize the impact to the customers and the pedestrians. So 2 weeks ago, when we came here, we left, we met with DDOT, we looked at some strategies, we looked at opportunities in which we could allow us to work to have the stairs accessible. What we have here is just an aerial photo of the intersection of Terrace in Connecticut where we'll be working. And as you can see here, there's the west entrance. The majority of our work will take place inside of the station, but the challenge of having the work performed during the midnight hours will require permitting from DDOT to allow our cranes and the delivery trucks of the trusses and new escalators to park alongside here on Connecticut Avenue. And that is a traffic control plan that would allow that work to happen. Will start about midnight to about 4 in the morning. So again, that's a very short window, and that's only periodically. We're looking at each escalator as far as its replacement in its entirety to only being about maybe three to 4 weeks. And what I mean by that is that once we get to the point of removing the trusses, we'll start that Sunday night, work to Thursday, each night pulling out each individual section. there's about 6 to 7 sections when it comes to each of the escalators themselves. So there, again, that's where we have the staging challenge inside the station and outside. No work stage far as truss-wise would be out on the street at any time, except for during the hours of delivery and movement of the trusses. Next. Here is the proposed traffic plan we has presented to DDOT. As you can see here on Connecticut Avenue, the train, the cranes and the trucks would come by and deliver the material. We would then work to have that material offloaded and then lowered into the station. And at that time, once we get the trusses into the station, we can manure them and get them in place to set them down in the wellway. Here's a photograph of the entrance of the west entrance in the wellway area that I'm speaking to. And those are familiar with it. These are the intermediate level escalators that go from the mast. The first escalator we'll be taking out is escalator number 4. This is the escalator that we'll be removing first, and then we'll be removing also the west entrance street escalator as well. This escalator will allow us to remove the truss sections out of the station easily. So therein lies the safety and the concern that we have with maintaining those stairs open while we do that. Okay. Here is one of our plan drawings on how that is to be accomplished through our rigging and hoisting plan. As you can see here, this is the shoring towers and the rigging that has to be installed underneath the canopy. As you can see, there's going to be chain falls and structural beams to allow us to pick the truss up and put them in and to lower them into the station. Here, this little blue little outline figure, use that as an example as a truss section. So once we remove the truss from the trucks, lower them into the wallway here, we have that challenge of now picking them up, rolling them through, as the picture you saw before, that little short distance between the street elevator, that little hall there is where these towers are staged. Now we have to pick the escalator, lift it up again, and pull it in. Now, not only do it, once it's delivered off the street, it has to be hoisted in place, lowered down, then picked back up, roll through the corridor, go back down the intermediate section, then lift again. So there's a gantry system all the way down, lifting and lowering, lifting and lowering. Go to the next. Here's an example of some of the rigging and hoisting challenges that we've had over the past. This is Foggy Bottom. This is DuPont Circle. Anybody been to DuPont Circle know it is a very deep station. I believe Van Ness is probably the 8th or 7th or 8th longest station in the District of Columbia. As you can see here, this is a pretty long section of truss. On normal average, it's about anywhere from 20 to 40 feet. So coming off the street, lowering it in, and as you saw through that tunnel area, that was where it would be staged. If we didn't get it to a point before opening, we would have to leave it there in that section. The goal is always to get the truss down into the station, park it. So the next night, they'll come in, they'll hoist it, move it into place, and then start to lower it down the wallway. It's a pretty deep wellway. I don't know if you can see here, these are the gantries that hoist it and lower it all the way down in place. Now this is the first phase of this project, is removing the demolition and removal of the escalators. That in itself is a month's worth of time, which allows us to access the wellway itself, and then we would determine the structural integrity of the wellway. As you know, these escalators have been in service for over 30+ years. We don't know what we're going to find. We have to not only replace the sprinkler system, the electrical systems, and other different components that are in this wellway related to the escalator as well. So it's not as simplified as some would think. It's a lot of activity involved here, and to simplify it would just grossly take away from the magnitude of this project. And as we say, we're working throughout the region. There's about 79 escalators within this project that's being replaced in the district to date. So with the magnitude of which these escalators, as far as length is concerned, is the challenge in that 4-hour window a night. I know you say, well, we can just throw a few extra hours at it and try to expedite the construction in itself. But as you know, there's phases. You can only go so far until another phase of the work is complete. Yeah. So that's where we are there with the rigging and hoisting challenges that we have. And as you can see, when we installed the escalator at Foggy Bottom, we didn't have a canopy. So again, it makes it a lot easier. We come off the street and we use lowered in. That takes away from having to block off the stair, because that way it's just wide open. We don't need any rigging above you, or we don't need to have any obstructions there. So there we are with that. Again, as I was saying before, as part of this project, there's about 128 escalators throughout the entire system that we're replacing. 79 of those are in the district. All the work will contractually be complete by February 2020. Work is highly sequenced to minimize the impact to the customers. And a lot of this work, again, will occur outside the station when the station is closed. Station entrance closures to occur at stations with multiple entrances, which will allow us to actually expedite the time that it takes to actually do it with the entrance open. But back to your main point, and what I'm going to share with you and go over what we discussed 2 weeks ago, is that we've had an opportunity to collaborate with DDOT to come up with some ideas in which, once we assess the stairs, having them open at intermediate times. So once we get all the rigging in place and removal of the street escalator, we can then, once we determine the feasibility of the structural sound of the stairs, we can open it back up. So the first opportunity and window that we're looking at, once we start work, we'll be able to open this back up like in August. That's what our schedule is looking at right now. So we would be able to have it fully open up back in August, because we have to take the opportunity not only to put all this rigging in place, and as I showed you, that corridor there is a staging area. We really don't have a lot of space to take away from the venues up top to store a lot of this material. And it is a lot of material to be stored.
That's this August?
Yes, this August. As we talked about 2 weeks ago, is looking at having them open up intermittently, the stairs. So that's where we are right now. Once we start work, get the number 3 escalator out, we can look at the integrity of the stairs. If work that needs to be done, with 30 days in there of turning that work around, depending on what we find, and hopefully that gives us a window of opportunity to get in there and do what we need to do. And that, again, gives us, that opportunity to open the stairs to allow people to go in both ways. There's been some other proposals, such as weekend work, to help expedite this. We explored that opportunity as well. But what happens when we looked at that is the congestion that we would have on Connecticut Avenue on the weekend. You've seen the proposed traffic plan that we had up there. You imagine that on a Friday evening, Saturday morning, that it caused chaos. The bus traffic would have to be then rerouted as our old bus stop behind the UDC. You're just talking total chaos if we're to work during the day. Now, if it was opposite of Connecticut Avenue in some form or fashion, I think we have an opportunity. But to close off the street during the day, and where we have to park because the trusses would have to be offloaded and put back on. And the only time we do need to have the station closed is when we're lifting and dropping equipment down into the station. Because once we get it in the wellway, we're behind our barricades and we're working. So the opportunities that we would take on the weekend would just be for delivery, the movement, the installation of the new trusses, or taking out the old trusses. I don't think it's worth exploring, shutting down half of Connecticut Avenue over the weekend. I mean, we did look at that. Yes.
Mr. Watson, I was curious in terms of whatever
safety standards and requirements are necessary and mandated from a regulatory standpoint to the hoisting and rigging operations? What bearing will inclement weather have on those operations? And if it will impact operations, has that been built in or factored in as a contingency in terms of your suggesting that you could have the west side operational and open in August?
Yes. Again, what we've experienced in the past when it comes to the weather is just the high winds. Not having to have the crane, be in operation for that evening to be able to pick and hoist and then drop off the trusses.
So thunderstorms or that sort of thing will not impact?
It will. That's what I'm saying. The wind, and when we're setting up the cranes, because the crane is going to have to set out its footers and be dangling there with the truss in the air. So if you have high winds, thunderstorms, it could change the direction of that truss rather quickly. Even though it have a tagline on it and someone's holding it, you don't want to have someone out there in a thunderstorm, picking a heavy load of that magnitude over anybody's head, because anything could happen. Thunderstorm, lightning, we just wouldn't want to do anything under those inclement conditions. But those are in a contingency, because if we don't have that opportunity, that window during that particular evening, then we have to come back and reschedule it again. And that just pushes the schedule out.
That's precisely
Yes.
what my thought was,
Right.
in terms of that conceivably if you wind up with a spate of bad weather, it theoretically could push your scheduling farther back.
Right. Well, we're hopeful that we could get the opportunity and all the stars line up and we don't have that problem. But we do know projects do have their delays.
Always assume Murphy's Law.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%.
Assume Murphy was an optimist.
Okay.
Yeah, he's on the glass.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you let him finish let's let him finish the presentation, okay? We shouldn't take it now.
Okay, this is the community outreach part, which I'll let Chisholm go over in regards to.
Should we wait till the end of the presentations for questions?
Just have 2 more slides and that's
Yeah,
it.
let's let them finish and then. Do you want?
Okay.
Okay.
When we were here before, we heard you in terms of the community outreach that we need to do, and we have lessons learned, and we're revising and regearing our community outreach efforts. One of the things that we'd like to do, I'm proposing, is because this project is so complex, perhaps we would have a pre-closure site visit so people could actually see exactly what was involved with this project. And that's something I'd like to work with the ANC in terms of doing, and perhaps inviting other stakeholders. Of course, that we would be notifying stakeholders. We would be doing press releases, advisories, and what we call take ones, which is information that we pass out to customers so that people know exactly what's going on. There'd be signage at the station. One of the other things we've talked about in terms of outreach is we understand UDC has a farmer's market. So we're thinking about going to that farmer's market to have information tables to basically talk about what this project involves. We also have a partnership with Giant Foods, and we're looking at maybe having an information kiosk in Giant Foods to pass out information about the project. We have something at Metro which we call Metro Information Persons, and they're basically staff that volunteers to be at the station to pass out information to customers and to answer questions. We call them MIPS. So we will definitely have people like that at the station. We're also planning to put notices on the buses that serve Connecticut Avenue. It'd be like an 11 by 17 little poster that would be slid into the holder on the buses so people get an idea about that. Post-closure, we'd like to have quarterly briefings with the ANC, if that's something the ANC would like us to do. We also will be doing electronic mailings to stakeholders. Throughout this process, we're going to be developing a database of people, and then we will be periodically sending that information out to people. Definitely updates on the listserv. We've been working very closely, our media department, with Forest Hills Connection, so we would provide updates, and we might include photos so to give you an idea of what the progress is on the work. Also, I'd like to think about maybe doing some post-closure visits with some of the stakeholders, just to see what the impact has been, talking to the businesses, talking to the universities, just to see if there are any things that we need to do to kind of help minimize the impact on them. We're also going to be having quarterly meetings with DDOT, providing updates to them, if that's something DDOT would like to do, just to provide them updates on where we are. And we're also going to be coming out to community meetings. We've been invited to the UDC task force that's been formed around the Student Center. We've also been invited to Van Ness Vision, and we're also going to the DC Pedestrian Advisory Council. We're also going to do social media, and I'd like Brian to come up very quickly and talk about the social media part.
Our social media outreach entails a couple different things. Usually we give progress updates to many of the projects that are going on around the metro system that fall under the Metro Forward umbrella, which this whole escalator replacement project that Cedric spoke about earlier falls under. So on our Facebook and our Twitter feeds, we make mention of that when we hit some milestones, usually at 25, 50, 75%, and then opening. We'll post some pictures, we'll give some facts, we'll keep that estimated time of reopening posted and updated as much as possible. Also, just from a service perspective, because there is an entrance closed, because one escalator is out of service, we use social media to note any operational changes that happen at the station. So when you follow our service feed, if for any reason we have a train malfunction or the in-station staff has deemed it appropriate to hold customers at the top, at street level of the station, as in order to get a disabled train out or in order to clear the station of what they would deem crowding, we use social media as well as our Metro Alert system and our website to advertise those. Historically speaking, those events have happened very rarely during a station, with a station that has been undergoing an escalator replacement. We can probably count on one hand the times that it has happened at Bethesda. However, you know, it is something that everyone should be mindful of, and this is just another channel that we use to get that word out. Again, we mentioned the closing, we also mentioned the reopening, and then when our trains start moving, and then we also give a service update there.
Great.
Again, thank you all. Just wanted to just reemphasize with regards to the opening of the stairs, that frequency will be intermediate with the replacement of each escalator. So as we replace each of the 4 escalators, the opportunity when we come remove and replace the escalators, those are the windows and when the stairwell will be opened and closed. And as Brian mentioned, we'll be making those announcements and notifications prior to. So there's time for people to plan to utilize that section of the street or that entrance as it is open to access the station. I'll answer any questions at this time. Yeah?
So I guess we have some DDOT people.
Yes, we have
So
some
I
DDOT.
guess-
I didn't know whether or not you want me to answer questions or what DDOT.
Let's have DDOT. You want to chat?
Yeah.
Let's have DDOT speak first, and
Okay.
then we can kind of take questions all around.
Thank you very much for inviting us to be here, and we appreciate the presentation from WMATA, which is a reiteration of some of the material that we've already seen and reviewed with them. DDOT really appreciates the responsiveness that they've seen on the part of WMATA to the concerns that were brought up by the community, is simply to ensure that there's good, clear communication. And to that end, just to give you an example, I think we've already met with WMATA it's either 3 or 4 times in 2 weeks, including a meeting with UDC. We've gotten material from them. We've reviewed it. We've given them comments. Some of the material you see in here, other than material, very basic. It's about like the size of the barricade that's going to go around the closure. Same kind of barricade you see at every metro stop that gets closed. The big red, big blue. Sorry, red is DDOT, so it's automatic. Think red, but big blue wall. I think you can see it at Woodley Park. material, kind of refining it. So we're getting closer to a plan and a timeline. It's been very productive meetings with them, and this is a great example of it. We also are talking internally because we are kind of pushing Metro. I think they'll say very nicely, but we are pushing them to see where we can find additional opportunities. I think the opening of the looking at the opening of the staircase is a great example of that. We are also concerned about impact on Connecticut Avenue traffic, which is why we've asked them to look at alternatives for that crane. For example, we've asked them to look at, and I'll spill the beans here, we've asked them to look at the concept of using VZ Terrace for the crane work as opposed to Connecticut Avenue, for the stub of VZ Terrace that leads off of the west side of Connecticut Avenue, immediately south of the entrance, so that it would have no impact. However, when we did our own DDOT site visit, we noted some fairly substantial challenges that would be present just from doing that, just from a visual. You have the canopy in the way, which you wouldn't have on Connecticut Avenue. You have a grade change, which you wouldn't think about, but there is actually a not insubstantial grade change, and that will certainly have an impact on the equipment. So it may not be practical, but we certainly would like them to acknowledge that they've explored it. This is the real material that would be required, and here's why it might not be feasible. To that also, to the other end of that, if you pardon the pun, the east end of that, we've been looking with our partners at Park Van Ness on how they're managing pedestrian traffic there, as well as internally how DDOT might be able to manage some of the transportation network to accommodate pedestrian travel based on a closure. The good news is it doesn't look like the closure at the metro station, depending upon, again, upon the status of the stairs, it doesn't look like the full closure of the west exit will occur for the entire time through the end of the year when Park Van Ness's east side opens up. It looks like it'll just be for perhaps a few months, in which case then the west side opens back up at Van Ness Metro Station through the time, roughly speaking, that the Park Van Ness then reopens on the east side, which really releases a lot of the pressure that we're concerned about to ensure safe pedestrian access. The last part of that is ensuring that there's good, clear communication when the west exit is closed, so that pedestrians are aware of it well in advance and can start making their plans to travel to the east side, regardless of whether Park Van Ness is open or not, in enough time before they actually get to the station. So we're working with them on a signage plan for that as well.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew, M-A-T-T-H-E-W, Marcou, M-A-R-C-O-U.
Matt, before you sit down real quick, I'm sorry, would you just cover in a little bit more detail, I know you got some questions about creating a pedestrian path, doing a hawk signal. You talked about all options being on the table. Could you just cover a few of the options that are still on the table and being considered?
So some of the takeaways from the meeting a few weeks ago were a hawk signal. Another was reconfiguration of the Wyndham intersection to provide for a crosswalk on the south side. Let me start with those two. Given the short-term nature of the impact of the west closure with the east side closure, establishing that kind of substantial change to the infrastructure for that short a period of time would be impractical. It doesn't mean that we won't continue to look at it for the future, but for the purposes of this project and these two projects running simultaneously, those larger infrastructure changes are not warranted. We are looking at things like signal timing and pedestrian signal timing, as well as notice to pedestrians when they exit the Van Ness east side that there is a crosswalk immediately behind them at VZ Terrace, so that they can make the cross to the west side quickly and not have to go to Wyndham and then have everybody bunch up at the north end of Wyndham. So we are looking at different sort of short-term, more simple methods of helping to channel the pedestrian traffic in a safe way around the closure of the west side exit and the closure of the east side sidewalk at Park Van Ness.
So do either of you have more questions?
Not for Matthew. My question had to do with maybe just a clarification about this issue of the stair. So the idea is, just my simple understanding, the idea is you're going to pull the escalator out and you're going to look underneath there.
Correct.
And if it's horrible, then you're going to have to close it because you're going to have to redo the concrete and whatever. But if
Yeah.
it's not horrible, then basically that thing is going to be open except for when you have to put a new
Correct.
escalator in and out.
Correct.
So what percent of the time are we talking about having that open? So we're basically leaving it open except for occasionally one day here and there, or mostly it's going to be closed and occasionally it's going to be
Well,
open?
most is going to be closed. Occasionally it's going to be open. It's going to be intermittent.
Why, that's what I don't understand.
Why is that?
the
When
intermittency.
we're delivering and removing the truss sections, that's when we have to close it. Because the trusses that we bring in off the street and then put in the wellway and lower down and bring through what we call the chute, the wellway, and then turn the corner and go down the hall, at that time it'd probably be staged there. So that will obstruct the tunnelway for a portion of the period of time. Now, for that reason, because we're going to have to continue that process, so that's 1 week to remove trusses out, and then another week to put trusses in. So, like I say, it's periodically. So
But we're looking at like periodic 2-week closures?
2-3 week, I don't know. That's what I can't tell you.
Cedric, would it not be correct to say that as this gets firmed up a little more, we'll be able to give them a better schedule?
Yes, because right now, we don't know where we are. The investigation of the stairs is where we really are right now. And once we do that, and then we look at building a safe, accessible walkway through the tunnel, getting our, the fire department's blessing and everything that we can get people in and through there safely without having to add,
I wasn't looking for a promise, but just kind of in a practical sense, are we talking about 3 weeks closed and 2 days open and another 3 weeks closed, or are we talking about half and half, or?
We're talking full closures for those periods of time, because we really need that window of opportunity to do work. Like I say, we're only working with a full 4-hour window each night for us delivery. But once we get them inside the station, then that's when the work starts to move quickly. But it does take a week just to get the escalators out and then the new escalators in. So we're taking that week, each week for each section of that particular escalator to come in and out. So we're talking for each of the escalators, I would say 2 to 3 weeks for just one.
And then how
itself.
long before the next one?
And how long before the next one? We're talking 48 weeks. It's 48 weeks per escalator, but we're not talking about the entrance open itself. Once we get to the point where the escalator's in the hole, then we can have that entrance potentially open. But until...
And how long will you be, like, once it's in the hole, how long will that installation process?
Why don't you wait? I think we'll be able to come back to you with a more definite.
Right,
Okay.
one of our quarterly updates will provide you with a chart that'll, essentially like a graph that'll show you rough timelines of what you can expect to see as far as the entrance being closed and what you can expect it to be.
And just so,
We can't commit to
Yeah.
tonight to.
because you don't know what's
how many-
under there.
Correct.
Once you do know what's under there, we'll have a pretty good idea going forward of these 2 to 3 week periods that
Correct.
it's gonna be closed.
Correct.
Okay,
Right.
and we can incorporate that into the stakeholder notices and
Right,
things like
so
that.
yeah, so at our next quarterly briefing, you'll see rough timeframes of when you can expect to see it closed, when you can expect to see it open, because hoisting and rigging is over. Now
Mhm.
we're just populating and assembling it within our own confined space. And then you can see it when we move to the next long escalator, that we have another hoisting and rigging pattern, it'll be closed. When that'll be over, and we'll do the population of the new escalator, and so on for all 4
So
escalators.
it's intermittent.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you very much.
So is, any other questions?
I'm good.
I'm good.
All right, so we'll just start in the front and kind of fish around.
Hi, first of all, thank you all. You're almost half of the audience, the Metro and DOT. It's great you're here. There is one element of the government structure we haven't talked about, and I want to talk about it. The neighborhood is getting increasingly dense, okay? We have Park Van Ness with who knows how many people, and then further down, there's another large apartment building. Many of those people will use the Metro and the Van Ness station. I lived here for a number of years. And I have to tell you, I wish it weren't so, but sometimes the students are pretty rowdy and worse They come from a number of schools, they take the metro to get there, sometimes they might get on at Town, sometimes Van Ness. And I'm really concerned now with just 2 escalators, one up and one down, that already the noise and shuffling and pushing could really escalate. So what am I asking? I'm asking that there be more Washington Metro police in the station. I foresee problems that are already there.
We are going to have additional transit staff personnel in the station.
That's good.
That's part of our emergency response plan, to have additional staff there. We'll have a transit officer upstairs and a transit officer downstairs in the station.
That's good, thank you.
Door to
I'm
door.
glad to hear that.
Yes.
As a pedestrian, I still wonder, because you're certainly going to have dense numbers of people crossing Connecticut Avenue at certain times.
Yes.
So I'm still concerned about having the crosswalk, particularly by, is it Wyndham, by Potbelly? That's a terrible crosswalk. It's not well marked. People a lot of times don't even really perceive it coming down Connecticut as a stop sign or as a red light. So what can we do about that? And also, can we have a police, a real police, not a metro person, a real police person stationed there the days that it is going to be closed? Because you're going to, again, have a lot of people crossing that street. And it's not safe now.
I'll let
That's
Mr. Marquis
perhaps a
ask.
bit more like a DDOT item than a WADA item.
Right.
Unless they would like to take over restriping or crosswalks and installing signals, we're happy to help, because we're in the bus business now, so. But no, that's a very important point, right? So as you know, when Park Van Ness closed the Yuma crosswalk, one of the things they did to remove the visual cue that there was a crosswalk there was they actually ground out the crosswalk markings across Connecticut Avenue. To that end, we can also look at the crosswalk markings that exist at Wyndham and see what we can do to maybe make them clearer, more certain, help give people a better understanding that it's there. So we can certainly take that back. We certainly can't commit MPD resources. We can make a recommendation or the request to them, and certainly based on their own staffing needs and their own requirements and priorities, they may be able to assist, but we certainly couldn't make any guarantees to that. And I wouldn't say
the transit police, do they have authority to, like, if the crosswalk's messed up, or can they step in, or do they not have authority to do
No,
it?
that's not their jurisdiction.
Okay.
They're limited
No, I
to
just
our
want
property.
to know. Okay.
But I don't know.
In that regard, could you also look at the crossing time as well?
And so to that end, we actually have looked at the crossing time at Wyndham, and we looked at the crossing time at VZ Terrace, and we've looked at the crossing time at Albemarle. And we've just compiled those numbers and are going over them. I can tell you right now, we actually are at pretty high capacity in those numbers already. In other words, the time allotted for pedestrians to cross at those intersections is already fairly high relative to the standard speed at which people are expected to cross crosswalks.
It's insufficient.
What's that?
You have older people in this neighborhood, it's
And
insufficient.
physically challenged, as I am.
I understand. So, but I'm going back to our engineers. We just got the numbers. I'd like to go back over them, go over those numbers with them. But I did want to let you know that we actually, based on the numbers we've already seen, we're already at a fairly high allowance for pedestrian crossing. Part of which was probably from the original Albemarle tweaking for the Park Van Ness east side closure.
But when I'm crossing Albemarle at Wisconsin, don't they have longer times than we do?
I'll have to check the timing.
Can we look at that too as part of this? Because Connecticut Avenue probably may have more traffic, but certainly they're both main arteries or main roads going up and down. And so I'm pretty sure that that's a considerabably longer signal.
So part of the
Yeah, and it's a lot longer, but it has the arrow. Isn't there an arrow?
so
No.
part of the
It's a lot longer.
part of the concept behind signal timing is the geometry of the roadway. So one of the things I would have to look at relative from Wisconsin to Connecticut at Albemarle is whether because of the width of the roadway and the angle at which the two intersect, is the crosswalk longer or is the crosswalk narrower? If you think about it this way, you can actually look at the picture that they have. If you go back in this document to the picture that they show from above of Connecticut at VZ Terrace, you can see that because the streets are at an angle, are not at right angles to each other, the crosswalk across Connecticut is actually longer than it would be if the roadways were at strict right angles to each other. So the reason I bring this up is simply because it may not be perfectly comparable, Wisconsin to Connecticut, based on the geometry. But again, you can really go back and look at the numbers.
But you need to factor in the demography as well as the geometry.
We do. We
Okay.
do.
The age range.
Absolutely.
It's a mix, that's a challenge.
We understand that, absolutely.
Alright, so kind of working our way back. So second row, does anyone? Questions?
I just had a question. First question is, when do you expect to start? I know you haven't mentioned this.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah.
We're ready to start right now. We're just waiting to get the green light from DDOT for permitting for the contractor, so we can get started. So that's where we are right now. We're ready to start tomorrow.
Thank you. By the way, I should have said this is a very good explanation. Thank you all for coming. It's really excellent. And I have one more question. Was any consideration ever given, or is it feasible to use the platform for delivery of materials to the construction site and taking away the old stuff? To use the trains, in other words.
Use the trains. We have used the train in different configurations. However, to use the trains to get those trusses up the platform calls for some demolition or removing the entrance gates and probably having to move the fare machines, because we now have to pull those trusses through the station. So there's a lot of station furniture that had to be removed.
Yeah. Are you going to have better lighting downstairs?
That's one of the proposals that's coming about with the escalators being installed, is new
Reading
lighting.
15 minutes for a train, it's nice to be able to read.
We won't have any on the platform, unfortunately.
No new lights?
No, not on the platform.
They've done it at Ferry North.
So not as part of this project.
Pressure pipes also.
There is a lighting project going throughout the authority, but I'm not sure it will be in coordinate with the replacement of the escalators on the platform. I know from the entrance level way, we're adding new lighting as we come through and install the escalators in the entrance and in the intermediate wells. But there is a project underway as far as, yeah.
Before we move on, Matt, could you talk a little bit more about where they are in the permit process and try to give us?
So they are at what I would call a mid to late midpoint in the permitting process. They sent us their first set of plans. We looked at the first set of plans, provided review and comment on those. They've made some modifications on the basis of that. They've brought themselves much closer to what we would need to provide final approval. You're looking at a traffic control plan in this document, for example, that is much closer to the real world conditions and the needs that we would have. So we're much closer. I wouldn't say that we're going to issue a permit to them tomorrow, but I would say that you can expect a permit to be issued to them in short order. I will, however, I will make a commitment here that we will be in touch with the ANC, and we will make sure that the ANC, and through the ANC, the community is able to know when the work will begin. As WMATA committed here earlier, they do not want to start work without having everybody know that it's about to start. Ms. Chisholm offered to have a pre-meeting, which I thought was a great idea, before the closure even starts. So it's not as though, I did actually, while sitting here tonight, to give you an idea of the efficiency of our system, I did actually receive notice of an application that had just been filed and approved it. So our system is that efficient that I technically could go that quickly on a permit, but we're certainly not going to do that in this case. We want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But we also want to make sure that WMATA is able to move forward with this work, because these escalators will be replaced. It's definitely needed, and it has to happen so that more work can continue to happen. We really do appreciate the partnership that they've presented to us, and we look forward to continuing that both here and in future locations up and down Connecticut and in the city.
Great. So third row.
In terms of pedestrian usage, at the upper and lower ends of the long escalators, once the trusses are in and the escalator pieces start coming in. Can you give us a sense in terms of how much square footage is going to be blocked or obstructed for safety reasons, for us to get a sense as to ability to ambulate around the various platform areas? In other words, are we going to have a funneling effect in terms of like an hourglass effect in terms of trying to squeeze people through a very narrow area because so much has been obstructed for safety reasons?
No, we're approximately about 4 feet off the entrance of the escalator. So at the north ends of the escalator, as you approach the escalator, we're 4 feet off from there. And there's like a little, what we call our floor plate, bearing plate section area there. So from that newel of that end of that escalator, we're about 4 feet off. So that's going to be enclosed in with a barricade. So you're just simply coming around 4 feet from the end of the escalator to the operational escalators in the station, bottom and top. You want funneled one way or the other. The only funneling that we'll have to deal with is with the stairs, because we will have those rigging towers in place. So therefore, we have to secure them so that we don't get a lot of demise, as the young lady talked about with some of our younger students or whomever messing with it. Okay, so that will be the only funneling where we have to narrow that passageway, and I believe I mentioned that earlier, because once we do that, to try to make sure a clear passageway is maintained while we have that staging area and the material storage area, that is all secure and safe for passengers to come in and out through the terminal. That's the only place that you probably have to funnel through, but again, that's why we're here. We want to make it accessible.
So, Davis.
Where will that crane award place? Will the crane be there just from midnight to 5 o'clock, or will it be stored on the streets?
No, it's only there from midnight to 5 a.m. Hopefully gone by 5 a.m. But that's the only time it's there, when truss movement and delivery and removal of the trusses.
Yeah, and let me be more specific about that. The traffic control only starts getting set up at midnight.
Yes.
Which means the first barrels and cones start going out. And just as a good rule of thumb, the way traffic control is set up is that the first material is set up on the part that you approach. So for the north side, it'll be the northernmost cones and barrels that would go out. For the south side, the southernmost. And then, so those will be the first things going out at midnight, and those will be the last things picked up at 5 o'clock. So by 5 o'clock, the entire area should be clear.
Yes.
Great.
The roadway.
Got it. So third row, anyone else? All right, so fourth and fifth row. Matt, gentleman in the corner.
You've got a presentation for us that doesn't have anything in writing about weekend work. And I wanted to know if DDOT got anything in writing from Metro about the option to work on weekends.
Yes, they did, and I believe I spoke to that earlier.
We spoke to it, but there's nothing in writing shared with us.
It was.
I think that the biggest problem right now is the crane layout and how many lanes that would restrict on weekends. But my name is Steve Strauss. I actually do what you would call WMATA policy issues for DDOT. So I have an interesting question. I haven't given up on some weekend ideas. So it would be, in a lot of other transit systems in the country, they do weekend closures of stations to accelerate the pace of capital construction work. WMATA has not yet taken that plunge here, and I think it's something we ought to be looking at more. So,
Well, what I'm talking about is the weekend option that relates to the traffic control.
no, there is no.
I'm not done with my question. I'm not asking about that.
Okay.
You deal with that and come up with a proposal, that'd be great, but what we've been told here is about the surface traffic control. Option to do it on weekends, intersecting possibly with an option to do it on Easy Terrace. And I'm wondering why we're not seeing anything in writing about that possibility.
So I'll address that. Okay. As I mentioned, WMATA is in the iterative process with us in terms of their traffic control and their materials. So they've been refining more and more. They provided us with some relatively simple statements, I think that's fair to say, regarding VZ Terrace, the use of VZ Terrace, and regarding weekend work. We've asked them to sharpen those pencils, go back, and provide us with more information. We don't want to be told that it's infeasible or impractical. It may very well be, but we'd like to have a bit more verification and understanding of why. The same thing, just as an aside, we've done with Park Van Ness. We've asked Park Van Ness to sharpen its pencil, which they have done, and they have provided us with some very clear, concrete plans and challenges that would be presented by using the east curb lane at their project as an open walkway, or as a walkway, I should say, either 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, weekdays, weekends. So we've asked that of all of the parties here, as we had committed a couple of weeks ago here with the ANC, to go have everybody go back, sharpen their pencils, look at it a little bit more discreetly, and come back with more information. We've asked that of WMATA. They've done a very good job of that, for example, with their traffic control plan. They've given us a clear understanding of how many vehicles are going to be required, what the layout of those vehicles is going to be, the outriggers, the mats. They have to protect the public space below it. They have to provide the proper bracing for the crane for when it operates. And so just as an aside, as I mentioned, given the change in grade at VZ Terrace, that will present even more challenges for a crane there. So that may very easily tie into why it's impractical, but they'll come back to us with the basic, clearer, I should say, information on why it would
Why
be.
can't they remove the canopy? Why is
We've asked them for that. We've asked them for that information too.
There's nothing in writing in the presentation about possible removal of the canopy and how that could provide an advantage or strategic option that we're not hearing anything about.
We have discussed that with WMATA as well. That's part of what they're going to be bringing back to
Well,
us.
I'm glad to hear this, but I think we would like to see in writing what you just described, both from the developer and from Metro.
Okay. I will make a commitment here. I did it the last meeting, so what the heck, why don't I make another one? Go for broke. That to the greatest extent practical, we will share the technical material we get with you. Obviously, we don't want to share any information that's either proprietary or that can create, let's say, unintended information for persons who might have less than the character of angels. So, but we do want to make sure that you understand, and that's one of the reasons why they came back with the plans. If you look at the material that was provided today, it's not insubstantial. It's not just writing. It's clear traffic control plans. It's clear schematics on what the actual work of bringing in a truss in and out are. Photographs showing the actual work of bringing a truss in and out. What the real world circumstances are. And we appreciate the fact that WMATA has gone to that extent, provided that information. You all certainly deserve to be parties to that information, and we look forward to continuing that cooperative sharing process, which actually was laid out quite well with Park Van Ness in their processes of explaining the need for the sidewalk closure on the east side of Connecticut.
Great. So there,
Actually, I want to go back to Steve real quick, because you were going to...
Okay, so it would be very helpful from a policy standpoint to me, because I think WMATA's nervous about jumping into the pool of weekend closures. If the ANC would consider a very general resolution that says we are open to discussing with you the advantages and disadvantages to our community of full weekend closures or maybe single day weekend closures if it achieves the ability to compress the total schedule from 2.5 years or 2.75 years down to something less. Because I still have some ideas based on what I've heard tonight about how they could get some.
It should definitely be done. It's useless to us on the weekends. We don't use it.
Well,
Speak for yourself.
some people use it, and I did send the ANC the numbers on the weekend ridership.
I bet it's 10%.
But it's about 50%, maybe a little less on Saturday, and it's below that on Sunday.
so we're
I
happy
think
to.
yeah,
So we're having a meeting next week. I don't know if that timing
That would be fine.
works for you, but
Yeah,
we're
that
happy
would be
to
fine, because
discuss
this
that.
doesn't have, they can start and this could happen later, so, it's not as time sensitive as some of the other stuff.
Okay, no problem.
That would triple the number of hours you can work each week.
Yeah.
And
Right.
reduce.
Just for instance, what I've been thinking about here is like, he told you they have to bring all these sections down to the upper mezzanine, and then they have to lower them down in 4-hour windows into the thing. So if they can't put the crane upstairs and do that on a weekend, they can at least, when they get these 6 or 7 segments at the upper mezzanine, close the station for a weekend, pop, 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 get them all loaded in one weekend and not 10 nights or something.
Right, and we have done that. We've done that at Bethesda, but Bethesda had a little bit more advantage because we had a bus loop at Bethesda, so it was very easy
Yeah,
to
so you have
divert
a
the
lot-
track.
Yeah, and we can work out the bus shuttle stuff. That can be worked out.
But perhaps this is not the forum to
Right.
do that design
Right,
work.
we don't have to do
Great.
that today.
I just wanted to come back to you. I appreciate that thought, and I think that's definitely a
If
resolution.
I remember, this came up 2 weeks ago at the meeting, and I seem to remember you suggesting that there wouldn't be that much span of work time savings by doing weekend closures.
Right, but Steve says he was to explore that even more, because again, we're only there, when we're at the point of doing weekend work, we're only moving the trusses in and moving the trusses out. So, and that's for each escalator. And I told you earlier, maybe 2 to 3 weeks for one escalator. So what we gain or what we don't gain as far as incapacity or inconveniencing the customer for a day or two on the weekend. And I know that the station may not be heavily used, but nevertheless, there are people that use it. We have to be considerate of those individuals that don't have vehicles and need to utilize the system, and that's why we're there. But we are going to explore that, and we'll come back, and as we'll meet with DDOT to look at some strategies to be able to, expedite the project. Trust me, if it's to our advantage to have this project go quickly. I do not wish to be here 3 years, and I'm sure our contractor feels the same way. If they had the opportunity to, work weekends, 2-3 weekends at a time out of a month, they would love that. But again, what impact would that be on the authority and to the community? Because there is some cost involved. Trust me, there would be cost involved.
So other transit systems in the United States are weighing those costs versus the ability to get work done faster, which saves people money and saves people also the anguish of the larger amount of people who have to cross Connecticut Avenue twice a day, for another 3 weeks because we didn't close it down on a weekend. So yeah, there are absolutely balances, and that's what we have to sharpen our pencils and look at closer, and then have a discussion of whether it's worth it to us.
Okay.
Great. So, do you both have more questions?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Does anyone else in the audience have a question?
I just
Miss
have
in the
one more
back.
question about the social media alerts about opening the stairway. I've never seen, I get alerts about Metro, whether Metro's running, whether it's slow or fast. I've never seen an alert about an opening of the stairway. How will you convey those alerts?
Pretty much like it is. So this would be a unique situation because traditionally when we do an escalator replacement project, we either close a side completely or we are working in an environment where we can have escalator service continue to be provided. So we usually just close a stairway, or I'll say a station, for an operational challenge, and we started that this morning when when Bethesda was closed, because we had, it turned into a larger infrastructure incident, but it started with just Bethesda being closed for crowd control as we mitigated through the crowd in the station. It just the way that the few other times that it has happened, we went through the process like we did this morning. 5-10 minutes later, maybe even less than 5, we would reopen the station, and then we would continue business as usual. Unfortunately, we had a larger problem, but that's the messaging that gets sent out about and there usually is a shuttle bus parked at the station affected. Is that part of this operational plan as well? So there's a one shuttle bus on standby. If the issue dominoes like Bethesda did this morning, then we need to pull resources from other parts of the system. But does that answer your question?
So for the intermediate or sporadic or whatever word they were using, opening of the stairs, you'll be sending alerts, letting
Sure.
riders know the stairway at the west side of Van Ness.
So the website gets updated, we would update that in the advisory, and then, right, we would push that out, on our service, on our service Twitter feed. And then, there's also the opportunity to use Metro alerts, so those who are not socially connected, but still signed up for the email text message alerts, will receive notice that either, on this specific date, or depending on how far out we determine, that the west side will be open. And then when we begin to get ready again, we'll use that as an opportunity. A lot of those are found in the advisory, which get emailed through the Metro alerts.
Is that also pushed out to the local news media as well?
I think it usually is,
TV
yes.
and
It usually
WTOP
is.
and so
Sometimes we are at the mercy, as you understand, of the news day. So
What's
while
happening
we
again?
may let people know that.
Yeah, the
some
situation
things
at
may happen.
Bethesda was pushed out on the news media. this
Sure,
morning on
of
the local
course.
station.
Yes.
So that was very helpful,
Right.
informative, and I'm just wondering if the same process could occur here.
Same process usually occurs. Like I said, the challenge sometimes is, because they might call, like, let's say we have closed one of these other stations for 5 minutes. By the time they call, they get the information they're looking for, the station's already reopened. So that's why sometimes you might see it through other channels, but not, in the 7:25 news break in the middle of
Right,
the day.
almost in real time.
And just to be clear, a lot of the staircase openings, they'll have an idea that once they get under there, and so alert is a bit of a misnomer for that. It would be a little bit better planned than that.
Right, absolutely.
And that's why I spoke to the fact that traditionally it's an advisory, because the advisory is planned information. If we foresee within the next week or two that we're going to reopen, and it's going to be reopened for X period of time, we'll advise of that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Also, I'd just like to take this opportunity and give our respects for the passing of Commissioner Ms. Karen Perry to the group. She'll be dearly missed. So I just want to say,
Actually, I know our new Commissioner Perry quite well as the chair of the Public Space Committee, so putting on a different hat at DDOT that I wear. As the chair of the Public Space Committee, Commissioner Perry was a very excellent commissioner and advocate for her neighbors. She was truly a DC original, and she is sorely missed by the committee, and we'll mention her at this month's meeting in May 28th.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming. Appreciate it. So our next meeting we'll have on Tuesday next week will be an official meeting. 7:30 we'll discuss Sedgwick Gardens Forest Hills Park permit for a monthly concert series. If there's any Metro related stuff, and we'll consider the weekend closures. Thank you.